Well, how many of you received a piece of celebratory cake before you came in? Wow, seriously? There was 4 of you, and it was good. You guys got dominated by the first service people. Because, see, we spared no expense to bring to you a cake to eat, because this is our 2-year celebration as a church. That's pretty strong, right? Like, you don't have to pay for the cake, you just eat it. Just eat the cake. Well, here's what's crazy. We told everybody this as they were leaving. I guess that's why they went and devoured it before you got here, which is a little awkward. But we ordered the cake today from the finest cake maker in Flagstaff. And Greta called them and said, hey, could you make a cake with the number 2 on it? And then they got here, and it was a cake with the letter Q on it, which was pretty awesome. And so right before we unveiled this thing, Chad was back there changing the Q to a C. See what he did there? Because C stands for commons. So we had a C cake, and apparently none of you got it. So that's what you get for being lazy and showing up right up late or whatever. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry you missed out on the cake, but you know, it's kind of funny looking back on the history. There's some left. Oh, so you guys just didn't want it. It's even more awkward. It had a C on it. That's what we put on it, kind of. So here's the deal. Looking back on it, it's kind of ironic because when we first started the Commons 2 years ago, we were racking our brains over like a tagline to put on the bottom. And we finally decided on free cookies, maybe, which is still on our Facebook page. So it's kind of like free cake, maybe, for you guys, but who knows. So here's the thing. You guys, have you been enjoying the incredible fall weather? Yes? Yeah, great. Well, I went up to Lock and Meadow. I've been there for a couple days because I went up there with the little kids Thursday, and then I went up there to celebrate with my daughter Aspen, because you may not know this, but not only is this the Commons birthday, today is my oldest daughter's birthday, Aspen. How about a... Yeah, that's right. She's so great. She turned 7. She's awesome. A lot of you, I don't know how many of you are here, but we actually had a party at Lock and Meadow last night. Some of you might have been there. And we had, she wanted a glow stick party, so after the sun went down, we had a big fire, and we had glow sticks, hundreds of glow sticks, and kids running everywhere. So basically, we threw a rave for 7-year-olds. And I don't know if you're supposed to do that or not, but it was awesome. There was cake and fire and glow sticks, and there was a rave, and it was incredible. But here's the thing with Aspen. Big day for her. But you guys know last week I talked about Aspen because she just popped a tooth out right before the service. Well, after service became a parent's nightmare. It's the tooth fairy nightmare. Now, how many of you guys were here when I told the story of how bad we botched Aspen's first lost tooth? Anybody remember that? It was a while back, probably about a year ago. But basically, I thought I would be Mr. Suave Tooth Fairy. And so I cruised in to Aspen's room, and I found some coins over on my dresser and threw them in a little bag. And what I didn't realize is I had grabbed some coins from these other countries that I just got to. In the morning, she's like, the Tooth Fairy came, but I think the Tooth Fairy's dad, because the coins are from Europe, and he just went there. It's like, oh, she's like Sherlock Holmes. So, but she didn't actually, that's to her credit for being brilliant. Not to her credit, she still believed in the Tooth Fairy after that, which I don't know how that happened. So then we think, well, okay, so this time it's got to be Marca's turn, right? Marca could knock this out. So I'm waiting, I wake up in the morning kind of waiting to see how it went. And Aspen comes in the room, and she said, Dad, the Tooth Fairy didn't come last night. And I kind of looked at Marca, you know, and she's going, she woke up. I was trying to get in there. She busted her. And I said, oh, it's okay. Tooth Fairy's probably late. You know, you'll give it another run. If you're not a parent, you don't understand. But this is a common thing in Tooth Fairy world to just postpone it tonight until the Tooth Fairy's coming again. So obviously I was back on duty. You know, it's time for Dad to be smooth. And so I go in at about 3 in the morning. I guess by now it's Tuesday morning. And I look in there, and Aspen is sound asleep, so I know I'm going to have success. But we don't really use cash a lot, and we didn't have any coins. As I was looking around the room, she's like drooling asleep. And I see next to her bed, there's this big jar of coins that she's been collecting. What? Look, do not judge me if you're not a parent. If you're a parent, you can judge me all you want, but I thought, well, this is easy. I mean, it's filled with coins. There's no way she'd ever know, you know? So I reached in there, and I moved this $2 bill over to the side so I could get into the real money. And I got 4 quarters, because we're pretty bling around our household, so they get $1 for losing a tooth. I don't know what the going rate is, but I'm pretty sure we're top. So threw 4 quarters underneath the pillow. She never noticed it, because I am basically James Bond or Jason Bourne, whoever inserted in there. I get out of there, and I'm pretty pumped to hear her in the morning, you know, with her big load of money that she just got. And so she comes and she says, Dad, the Tooth Fairy came. I said, what? That's crazy. She said, the Tooth Fairy brought me $1.12. And I was like, oh man, I guess we haven't cleaned her bed in a while. There's money in her bed already that we haven't cleaned. She managed to round up $1.12. I said, that's great. But she actually noticed. She goes, but the weird thing is, Dad, there was a $2 bill on my coin jar, and it's moved over. And I was like, you ready for a big day? Let's go. Hey, Tooth Fairy's great. So here's the thing, Aspen 7, that's a big deal, and I didn't know this. I actually had to ask the first service people this because Aspen told me this, and I thought, I'll just ask the church crowd if this is true, because she told me that it was her golden birthday because it's October 7th and she turned 7. I had never heard of that, and I asked the first service crowd, and they all did this, and I didn't know if it was just because you're supposed to say yes when the pastor says something, but have you heard of this, a golden birthday? Oh, you have, okay, so I'm the only person on this planet that's an idiot. Good to know. I didn't know that. It's her golden birthday. It's all about 7. She's 7. It's the 7th. So all of that was all for a transition for you guys to talk about what we're going to talk about next. And it's all about the number 7. If you haven't been with us, if you haven't walked with us for the last month and a half or so, we've been having a running dialogue or discussion. And we've been talking about what it looks like when someone's life intersects with God. And so we've got to look at a lot of cool stories like Moses and the burning bush and different people who crossed paths with Jesus and what that did. And to be honest, that's probably the most fun I've had in a discussion thinking about things because it's really amazing looking at the Bible and these incredible stories of how lives are changed. But we're going to start a new discussion today. And because it's October, it's going to be dark and it's going to be scary because we love Halloween at the Commons. Can you guys handle a dark and scary discussion for a whole month? Are you excited? Here's what we're going to talk about. For 1 month solid and maybe longer if I can't get my act together, we are going to talk about the 7 deadly sins. Bum, bum, bum. I asked for a sound effect first service and I didn't get one, so I thought I would just make one this time. So here's what I want to do. I want to stop right before we dive in. I want to tell you why we're going to do that, and I first off want to tell you what I'm really scared about. I've been thinking about this for a while. I've been thinking about looking specifically at these concepts. Okay, so the church historically, just so you know, a little bit of history behind the 7 deadly sins. You may say, is that from the Bible or is that from the church? There's a little bit in the Bible about it. Trey, I don't know. We didn't do it first service. I don't know if you have that Proverbs verse, Proverbs 6. But this is one close thing to the Bible talking about 7 deadly sins. It says this: there are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. The only reason I'm sharing that with you is I think it's so cool that they say there are 6 things the Lord hates and 7 that are detestable to him. Does anybody talk like that? I have 3 things I need to do today. 4 that must be done. I'm like, that's the way you say something. Like, why just say 7? There's 6 things. No, 7 that God hates. And I'm going to list them. Now, here's the thing. This list right here is not what we consider the traditional 7 deadly sins. Now, Galatians 5 has a list that's longer than 7 of vices and evil things that keep us from God. But traditionally throughout church history, it's really important to know, by the way, this is our history, even though it's Catholic. Catholic is universal. It's who we were. 300 years after Christ, we already have authors writing about this idea of 7 particular, what they would call capital sins. Now, capital comes from a Latin word, caput, not the German kaput, but the Latin caput, which means head. And it means it's the head sin. And the idea is not that there's a whole new category of sins that are different. The idea was the body of Christ and followers of Christ said, what is the core thing that keeps making us mess up? If we go back to the beginning, is there a root of the evil that so easily distracts us and keeps us from being the very best version of ourselves? And so very early on, there became these lists and ideas of trying to figure out what are the 7 deadly sins, the capital sins, the things that seem to derail us more than anything else. And they became probably most famous and most standardized years later. The Pope, around 400, Pope Gregory, came up with a specific list of the 7 deadly sins. And then they became infamous forever in the 1300s with Dante's Divine Comedy and the Inferno. And they were ingrained in Christian culture, the idea of the 7 deadly sins. And we actually have a photograph here. This is a painting of the 7 deadly sins. And Trey put a red 7 on top of it because it's scary. Are you guys okay? Should we keep going? Okay, red 7, scary sins. Now here's the thing. Here's truly what I'm scared about. As I was thinking about talking about this, my big fear is that we will sound like what the church has made the mistake of doing for over 100 years, maybe even longer, but in our country for over a century. Because you see, what happens is sometimes the Christian church starts to behave a little bit like the Pharisees, who, as you know, were the people who took the most venom from Jesus, that he was most frustrated with. And the fact that sometimes Christianity, here's what I want you to hear, sometimes Christianity starts to become a set of rules of do's and don'ts. It starts to become about who's better and who's in and who's out and about performance and are you loved and how much do I sin. And I'm so scared that if we look specifically at these things that can rob us from the best life in Christ, that we will start to go down that human path, which, by the way, is one of those sins. We want to have control. We want to be able to make rules and put God in a box. And I am so scared. I'm begging you as we go through this to do this. As we look at these sins very specifically, and by the way, we're not going to look at any of them today. We're only going to introduce the concept today and invite you into this process. But as we look at these 7 deadly sins, these capital ideas, I'm asking you to look at them through a lens. I want you to look at them through the lens of the unconditional love of God. Knowing that the only reason we bring up sin is to show how great the love of God is. Let me give you an example. In my own life, if I was a really great person that hardly ever sinned, and then found out someday that God really loved me, I would go, yeah, I pretty much expect him to. I'm a pretty good guy. That doesn't describe my life at all. My life has been a train wreck of failures and struggles and heart issues and hurting other people and hurting myself and hurting the heart of God. And when I look at the sin in my own life, which is vast and many, I see how great the love of God is. Because he can love even me. And if you remember the stories of people we've looked at who've crossed paths with God, they were like me, messed up, filled with deadly sins that were leading me in the wrong direction. But God's love is the lens I want to look at these things through. Agreed? So, why do we look at those things? Why do we want to dive into and look at something as dark as sin in October and Halloween month? Well, I want to look at that through the lens of a story from the life of Jesus in John chapter 9. Now, here's what I want you to do. You might have heard this story before. It's unique in that of all the stories of the life of Christ, this specific story about a healing takes up an entire chapter of the Bible. We're not going to read the whole thing. We're going to kind of hit little passages and sum it up. But the unique thing about it is this. These authors who wrote these 4 books, who went to their death saying what they saw and heard was true, they typically tell you incredible miracles, and we are left to try to figure out what it means. But every once in a while, they actually explain the spiritual significance for us. And that's what I want us to focus on as the climax of this story, John chapter 9. But check it out. Here's what's going on. John chapter 9, verse 1. And part of this won't be up on the screen. It says this. As he went along, he saw a blind man born from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, or teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, does that seem at all like a weird question? If you really step back for a second, if you were walking with Jesus trying to learn, and you walked up and you saw a man blind, would you ask the question, who sinned, this guy or his parents, that he was born blind? The first weird thing about it is, how could he possibly have sinned if he was born blind? He wasn't even born at the time. How could he sin? The interesting thing is, now I want to take a little side tangent here. I love that the disciples here, as always, look a lot like idiots because Jesus is about to correct them. And the reason I love that is in the nerdy field of textual criticism, when you look at a document to determine if it's authentic or not, there's several measuring sticks you can look at. One of them, amongst many that the Bible is very strong on, is that the authors of a document always seem to paint themselves in a good light when they're fabricating a story, because they have the control to change details making up a story, and they want to make themselves look good. I love this. This drips with authenticity because these authors constantly look like chumps. They never understand what's going on. They never get it, and here again they have the wrong perception. Now, to their credit, historically we know a lot about Judaism and what they believed. We can read the Talmud, commentaries on the Old Testament, songs written in the 1st century, and we know that the Jewish belief was exactly what they were questioning. The Jewish belief was you could actually sin in the womb. As crazy as it is, there's Jewish songs from the 1st century of saying a woman who goes into a heathen temple, their fetus actually sins with them and will be cursed, and crazy things like that. And I love that Jesus shows up and he proves all that wrong. Here's his answer. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. He's saying that's not the issue. But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. So Jesus is correcting this cultural misunderstanding. He's saying you got the whole wrong picture. Everything that's bad in life doesn't necessarily work as a result of some sin in someone's life. In fact, what Jesus is saying, God is in essence saying, is some suffering in our lives have a very high purpose. And all we know is that in this specific case, Jesus has something big in mind for the suffering of this man that was born blind. Well, here's what happens, skipping over to verse 6. Having said this, he spit on the ground. Jesus is so weird. He made some mud with his saliva, and he put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. And so the man went away, and he washed. And it says right here, John wrote this. Remember, John knew Jesus. Remember, John was there when this happened. And in this simple phrase, and came home seeing. Extremely understated. He was blind, physically blind from birth. And John tells us right here that he came home seeing. His life was changed forever. How do we know that? Look at the reaction. This is verse 8. It says, his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. And he himself insisted, blah, 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 blah. Here's what I want you to hear. This man probably, I'm guessing, in the supernatural miracle, didn't have physical features changed. I don't think his eyes glowed green when he could see again, or his nose changed shape. But there was something about him. After his life intersected with Jesus, there was something about his changed habits, the life in him, his story, his changed person, that he was so completely different, people argued as to whether or not it was the same person. And I think that's really cool. It's not what the message is about today, because I think when our stories intersect with Jesus, our lives often look like that. Completely different. It might be questionable if we're even the same person. Now, from here, I want to paraphrase a little bit. The Pharisees get really ticked off because Jesus is already getting attention. In fact, we know from some of this that people are already believing that Jesus is the Christ. They're believing that he is God. And you may not know this, but in first century Judaism, it was a very common belief that there is only one entity in the universe that cures blindness. And that would be God the Father, Yahweh, I am, like we've talked about. And so this healing meant a really big deal. Jesus was again claiming who he was. From the Old Testament through Deuteronomy and Psalm 149 and Isaiah 43, there's many references to the Messiah being God's own hand working salvation and restoring sight to the blind. The Pharisees understood the political significance of the crowd and how they were responding to Jesus. So they dragged this man in. They questioned him. He told them about the mud. He told them he could see. They got ticked off. They dragged his parents into it. They said, is this your son? They said, yes. The Bible tells us they were scared of the Pharisees and said, you can ask him for himself. I want to skip to verse 45. You'll recognize this. It says a second time in verse 24, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man is a sinner, talking about Jesus because everyone's so fired up about him. Verse 25, he replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. The great line, stolen years later for Amazing Grace, which I'm so glad was. What a beautiful lyric. I was blind, but now I see. And let me tell you why I'm challenged by that and why I love it. My natural bend in my own journey in following Christ is to follow after the intellectual reasons, to look at philosophy and science and what we know about textual criticism and history to say, do we have enough intellectual reason to put our faith in Jesus? But when this man was questioned about him, he had a much simpler answer. He said, I don't know about any of the things you're asking about. I just know that I was blind, and now I can see. Here's what's beautiful. That's enough. That's enough of a reason for us. Because in our own lives, and I hate to admit it, but I think the truth is the very best apologetic or defense of our faith in this invisible God who loves us so much is our changed lives. The fact that I could spout out a bunch of information all day long, like pouring out water from a fire hydrant, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is to be able to say, all I know is before my life intersected with Jesus, I was blind, and now I see. I think that's really, absolutely beautiful. So they get angry, they kick him out, they're religious, they're mad, they call him a sinner, they talk about how incredibly great they are, and who is he to question them, the great Pharisees and their morality and their understanding of God. They physically kick him out, and here is the climax. The whole story crescendos to what the NIV calls spiritual blindness, and a heading. Different translations say different things, but verse 35, listen to this. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Now, time out. To me, this might be the coolest part of the entire story. So what happens is this guy gets kicked out by the righteous, the religious, those people who have it together and claim to have no sin. They physically kick him out of the temple. And then listen to this phrase again. And when he found him. It means that Jesus went looking for this guy. Jesus pursued this man. Now, I don't want you to miss this, because so much in how we communicate about Christianity is what it looks like to follow Christ or become a follower of Christ. But John, this dear friend of Jesus, remembers a time where Jesus actually followed this man and hunted him down and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Now, here's why I love that. C.S. Lewis, this is one of the coolest things. C.S. Lewis referred to Jesus and God. He referred to Jesus as the great hound of heaven. Because he believed at the incarnation, when God squeezed himself in a body, he came running after humanity. And he believed, and I also believe, that God pursues our hearts in the same way that we see hound dogs go chasing after things. Jesus chased after this man that he loved so much. But here's the spiritual stuff I wanted you to hear. "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The blind man, former blind man, replies, "Who is he, sir?" He asked. "Tell me, so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have now seen him." What a cool way to say that to a person who was just healed from being blind. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. Then the man said, "Lord, I believe." And John wrote, he worshipped him. That would be a huge, shocking statement for a Jewish person to write about one human to another. It's a big deal that a Jewish person said this man worshipped a human man. He's saying he understands the godness of who Jesus was. Jesus said in verse 39, "For judgment I've come into the world so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Now here's what I want you to hear, verse 40. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this, and they asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Probably tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic, fearful, who knows, at the presence of Jesus. They ask, "Are we blind too?" And Jesus says in verse 41, "If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." So what? What does this have to do with the 7 deadly sins? What's the point? Why would we want to dive into this? And here's where I want to start. I want to start with us all understanding something that Jesus desperately wanted his followers in that crowd to understand. He said at the beginning that this man was blind for a reason, for God's purpose, that glory was going to be brought. And then at the end of it, it ends up that it's not really about that man's physical vision so much as this very spiritual issue that there are human beings who still believe that they can be good enough for God. Pharisees 2,000 years ago, Christians and anyone else today who believe that they can be good enough. They don't have these core capital sin issues that are tearing them from God. So here's what I want you to hear. More than anything else, before we dive into this, the thing that I love about the 7 deadly sins, as dark as they are, we all have them in common. Me, you, every human being except that very unique one 2,000 years ago. We're all on the same page. We all have the same disease, but here's the message I want you to hear. This word, hope. See, Christianity is not laws and rules and religion. It is hope. In fact, Jesus got himself in the most trouble because he kept running into people who knew they were sinners, who would fall at his feet weeping, like we talked about the woman earlier, and beg for forgiveness. And Jesus, a man, would say, "I forgive you." And it ticked the Pharisees off that God had showed up, and his message was a message of hope. No matter how dark the sin, how appealing it is, if it's a head sin or one of the branches that come off of it, there is hope in the person of Jesus Christ. Now I love this. John wrote this. Scholars think possibly up to 30 years later, he wrote this in a letter as an old man to his friends at a church. He was probably in Ephesus when he wrote this. A long way away from Jerusalem, decades later, lived quite a journey. And he says this. I wonder if he was remembering the blind man and what Jesus said. Verse 8 of 1 John 1. If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth isn't in us. But if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. I think that has to be one of the most beautiful messages in the Bible. If you confess your sin, In other words, if you can see it, if you're not blind to it, if you can see that we have a condition that will rip us from the joy we are designed for, then you have great hope. You can confess that to God, and because of Jesus, you can be white as snow, as Isaiah said, looking way into the future. There would be a day, Isaiah saw, when God's own hand worked salvation, and though our sins be as scarlet, we could be made white as snow. So as today we come to communion, as we always do. Communion is a gift, and it's a mystery. It entails a lot of different things, and I think trying to describe communion is a mistake as large as trying to describe marriage. It's a concept, it's big, but one thing about communion is it's a time, as Christ commanded us to do, to remember his sacrifice and his blood. But hear this, it's a time for you alone with God to confess your sin and to receive into your body the picture of his broken body and blood, which can make you white as snow. And that's one thing that makes communion so sweet. So feel free to join us. That's what the crackers and the wine and grape juice represent. And then I'm going to pray for us, and we'll do that together. God, thank you again for this gift. And I confess again to you, God, just the new sins today that I have found, and ask you to forgive me. God, I pray for all of us, God, that we will see the things that rip us from the glory you designed us for. And let us bring them to you, and let us be so different and transformed that people won't even recognize our lives. And God, I pray as we begin this discussion and we start looking specifically at each one, that you open our eyes, you open our hearts to see through the lens of your great love how much deeper we can go with you. We love you.
Regrets collect like old friends, here to relive your darkest moments. I can see no way, I can see no way. And all of the girls come out to play. Every demon wants to smell of flesh, but I like to keep some things to myself. I like to keep my issues strong. It's always darkest before the dawn. my